Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, we have our reporters in Choi Ji-hee and Yoon Suk-Yeol. Guys, welcome back.
Good evening.
Good evening to you guys. We're going to talk about the Yoon administration and them unveiling its first national security strategy on Wednesday, check that yesterday, adopting a warmer approach towards Japan and vowing to strengthen cooperation with the United States and Japan based on their shared universal values. Ji, you're going to start us off. Give us the latest on that.
Right. So the new security strategy, the first release since President Yoon Suk-Yeol took office in 2022, highlights the government's vision to become a global pivotal state for freedom, peace, and prosperity amid the rapidly changing international environment and intensifying regional security threats. In diplomacy, unification, and national defense, this leading government policy paper is the first to be issued in 5 years, and it outlines the Yoon administration's goals to address current and future security challenges while defending universal values such as liberal democracy. Announcing the document in a press briefing, Principal Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Tae-hyo explained that the government's three goals are to protect national sovereignty and territory, and to promote public safety, and also to establish peace on the Korean Peninsula. And third, to prepare for a unified future and lay the ground for prosperity in East Asia while expanding our global role. Now, the document, while highlighting the importance of trilateral security cooperation among South Korea, the United States, and Japan to counter North Korea's nuclear and missile threats, pivots from Seoul's previous hardline stance on historical and geopolitical issues with Japan. Now, it emphasizes the compelling need to completely change the deteriorated Korea-Japan relationship into a forward-looking and cooperative partnership. Now, North Korea's continued advancement of its nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction was pinpointed as the most pressing issue in the region. And other challenges include intensifying U.S.-China competition and issues such as supply chain stabilization, climate change, and cyber warfare. And regarding China, the paper called for a healthier, more mature relationship built on mutual respect and reciprocity. And it also mentioned the THAAD deployment, which China had strongly protested in the past, saying it was a matter of security sovereignty. The paper also mentioned the need for the government to re-evaluate its diplomatic policy toward Russia, noting the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has been ongoing for over a year now. Also referring to the government's Indo-Pacific strategy announced last December, the document stressed the ASEAN is a critical partner for promoting regional peace and shared prosperity.
It is interesting that they mentioned the THAAD deployment as well, which, let's face it, it is still very much a sensitive issue, well, only to China, right? China still believes that using the radar technology in the THAAD system, the United States is able to get some sort of information in regards to China and things like that. And China has always thought of the THAAD defense system as a threat. But for them to openly say that it is a matter of security sovereignty, it is going to be interesting as to how China is going to respond to this. But here there was also the mentioning of government strategy towards Pyongyang. We mentioned this before, the audacious initiative, and this was something that President Yoon Suk-Yeol has mentioned in the past.
That's right. So the document outlined the audacious initiative in more details, stating that if Pyongyang genuinely returns to denuclearization negotiations, Seoul will lead discussions by implementing initial measures to improve the living conditions of North Koreans. And once a roadmap for denuclearization is agreed upon, comprehensive measures covering the economic, political, and military sectors will be implemented simultaneously. And Seoul also plans to establish a new committee. This is the Inter-Korean Joint Economic Development Committee, which aims to focus on 5 major projects in infrastructure building, improving the living conditions within North Korea, as well as helping the economic development.
It's interesting the way that the Yoon administration is trying to lure North Korea back to the negotiating table by saying that if they hold discussions and everything goes well, they're going to be implementing initial measures to improve the living conditions of North Koreans. And I mean, the big question is, does the North Korean regime really care about the living conditions of North Koreans? I think the big thing is, although, again, I think it is important from our perspective, improving the living conditions of North Korean people is important, but for the North Korean regime, the Kim Jong-un regime, they're more focused on their safety. They want security guarantee is what it is. And so, again, I mean, this is what some of the experts are saying as well, is in that them saying, oh, we'll improve the living conditions of the North Koreans, that's not going to bring them back to the negotiating table. North Korea is going to eventually test their 7th nuclear test weapon, and they're going to use that as a leverage. They did that with the 6th nuclear test. After the 6th nuclear test was when they said, listen, we are now ready to hold discussions here, but at the same time, that was the Moon administration, and this is the Yoon administration. There is a very good chance that the Yoon administration, if they see that North Korea conducts their 7th nuclear test, they're going to say, deals off, no negotiation. It is going to be a very different approach that the Yoon administration is going to be taking. So it is going to be quite interesting as to how things are going to pan out, but still, we're trying to figure out how things are going to pan out with North Korea-related issues in the second half of this year as well. Of course, there is the long-standing issue in Korea, and this is the compensation of the Korean wartime forced labor victims during the Japanese colonial period as well. Regarding the issue, a surviving victim has withdrawn a request for a court order to dispose assets of the Japanese firms after accepting the Seoul government's compensation plan. We are seeing more and more of the family members of the victims and now the victims themselves saying, we are ready to accept the compensation. Haejung, you have more on this.
Sure. So today, according to legal sources, the plaintiff, one of the victims, submitted an application withdrawing the asset liquidation request to the Supreme Court the previous day. Now, back in 2018, the Supreme Court ordered Japanese firms, including Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel Corporation, to compensate 15 South Korean victims of forced labor. However, as the Japanese firms refused to pay the ordered compensation, the victims and their families filed requests for the liquidation of their assets in South Korea. A district court in 2021 ruled in favor of the victims, but the case has since been pending at the Supreme Court for over a year. And the person that has withdrawn the request for a court order is one of the 3 surviving forced labor victims who had objected the South Korean government's plan announced in March, which was to exempt the liable Japanese firms from responsibility for restitution and instead provide compensation through the Seoul-based foundation, which is the foundation for victims of forced mobilization by Imperial Japan without Japan's involvement. Now, the victim recently reversed the stance and conveyed a decision to accept the third-party reimbursement to the government. Out of the 15 plaintiffs, the bereaved families of 10 of the plaintiffs previously accepted the government's reimbursement plan, but 2 other surviving victims and the families of the 2 deceased are refusing a proxy payment via the foundation, demanding that the Japanese firms pay them directly.
Yeah, and that was the big controversy when the government had come out with this compensation fund that was solely funded by the South Korean companies and the South Korean government, because they're saying, well, the people that are responsible for forcefully making these victims work are the Japanese companies like Mitsubishi Heavy Industry and Nippon Steel. But why is it that South Korea is paying this? Although I believe one of the South Korean companies that had decided they're going to fund into this compensation plan was POSCO, I believe, which, I mean, they've received some money from Japan. So I think they were saying that POSCO should have paid in the first place. But it is getting interesting. The number is dwindling right now. We did talk about initially when this foundation was set up that at least one of the victims was very, very firm on not accepting the compensation plan, but we're now seeing the numbers dwindle. We're seeing people start accepting it. So we'll see what happened here. We're going to move on to some major domestic news as well. We're going to this is the ongoing controversy between the government and the Federation of Korean Trade Unions over the recent police crackdown on a labor sit-in. Yesterday, we had a chance to talk to Dr. Lee Byung-hun from the Chungang University in regards to this very issue. Well, the union decided to boycott the Presidential Advisory Board for labor policies. So, Ji, what's the latest on this?
Right, so the Federation of Korean Trade Unions announced on Wednesday that it would suspend its participation in a trilateral consultative body that has served as a dialogue between labor management and the government. Now, the decision came in protest of the government's use of force against one of its members who had been at a sit-in rally in Gwangyang. We've talked about this last week. And the FKTU, which is the more moderate umbrella labor union relative to the more militant Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, held an emergency meeting for about an hour and has reportedly decided it is not leaving the council, but it explained that the union leadership could decide to withdraw from the council at any time if deemed necessary. Now, the Economic, Social, and Labor Council has been a communication channel between the parties to find consensus on controversial labor issues, and the KCTU had left the council in 1999. And in the absence of KCTU, the FKTU has participated in the trilateral panel on behalf of the labor community, and its decision to leave the council would likely cut off the official communication channel between the labor community and the government. And what's concerning is that the decision might also affect deliberations over the minimum wage for next year. Yes, and the committee is responsible for agreeing on next year's minimum wage, which has the same general makeup as the Trilateral Council and was set to meet for a third round of negotiations, in fact, today. The council stated that conversation must go on even during a war, expressing its deep regret toward the FKTU's decision. Now, this is the first time in 7 years and 5 months that the FKTU declared its absence from the council during the back during the Park Geun-hye administration. Meanwhile, the presidential office took a hardline stance regarding this standoff situation as well. At a briefing earlier today at the Yongsan presidential office, an official said that although the relationship between the three parties and labor management dialogue is essential, the Yoon administration will not change all of its labor policy principles to maintain the relationship. And even the Ministry of Labor also criticized this recent decision.
I mean, ever since around towards the end of last year, we have been seeing clashes between the labor unions and the government, but we were hoping that and it's kind of interesting, again, the FCTU, right? They're more known for their quote-unquote very hardline stances. And, the word militant ways are often used. But it is also interesting that I guess the more moderate, the FKTU, is coming out like this, which shows you there is certainly this huge rift between the labor unions and the administration right now. Well, speaking of the minimum wage, the third meeting of the Minimum Wage Commission to determine next year's minimum wage level. This was held today. And again, one of the main issues discussed was whether the minimum wage should be applied separately by different industries. This is quite interesting. Hae-jung, fill us in on this.
So the third plenary session to determine next year's minimum wage was held today at the government complex Haejong. And previously, the first and second meetings were held last month, which ended with the labor and management only confirming their differences over the minimum wage increase and its scope. So it's hard to expect that any agreement was reached between the two sides today as well. And as she mentioned, as of yesterday, the FKTU decided to completely halt its participation in the Economic and Social Labor Committee, the ESLC, which is a social dialogue body directly under the president. So labor management relations have further strained, which is also a factor that may impact the negotiations on the wage level. And according to the labor community, today's meeting was held without Kim Jun-young, an executive of the Federation of Korean Metal Workers Unions, who is also one of the members of the Minimum Wage Commission that represents labor groups. He was arrested last month on charges of obstruction obstructing police suppression by wielding a weapon while staging a watchtower sit-in. The FKTU decided to suspend its participation in the ESLC in the protest of the heavy-handed crackdown on Kim. So the core item on the agenda, which is next year's minimum wage level, is expected to be discussed until late June or July. The hourly minimum wage in Korea currently is 9,620 won, which is roughly about $7.18. The year-on-year minimum wage increase in 2023 was 5%, and if the increase rate for next year is 3.95% or higher, the minimum wage for Korea next year will exceed 10,000 won per hour for the first time. And the business community argues that the minimum wage should be set lower for industries that cannot afford to pay wages, such as the accommodation and food industry, while the labor community argues that such a distinction goes against the purpose and intent of the minimum wage system.
Again, I mean, the whole idea of raising the minimum wage right now it's a very, very hot potato topic right now, especially at this situation, because we're still in the process of trying to lower the inflation levels right now. As we mentioned, in a perfect world, we would love to have everybody get raises, right? But also that also means that the employers have to spend more money, and so what happens then is they have to raise the prices of their products in order to meet the demands of the workers who want higher pay, which then leads to higher inflations once again. And then think about it, if I go, let's see, Ji-hee and Haejung's here, and then I go, I'm going to give Ji-hee a raise, but Haejung, I don't think I'm going to give you a raise.
No, I'm not going to be happy.
You're not going to be happy, right? That's the way that it works. The labor community does have a very good point in that it says it goes against the purpose and intent of a minimum wage system. And minimum wage is supposed to be equal to all sectors out there by law. And so it is a very, very tricky issue at this time. Let's move on here. Day after the chief of the Yongsan District Office, Park Hee-young, was granted bail. She returned to her office, but her return to work was, of course, faced with much backlash from the families of the victims of the Itaewon tragedy. So, Ji, you have more on this.
Right. So, Chief of the Yongsan Ward Office, Park Hee-young, left the Seoul Southern Detention Center yesterday after the Seoul Western District Court granted her bail. That's 5 months after she was arrested on charges of professional negligence regarding the Itaewon crowd crush last October. Now, under a few conditions that includes paying a bail deposit of 50 million won, which is about $38,000, and the requirement to stay at a designated residence, the Seoul Western District Court accepted Park's bail request. She's accused of not following her duties, and we know that she failed to prepare safety and accident prevention measures in Itaewon during that Halloween weekend, and she was not responding to the incident appropriately. She was also suspected of asking employees to falsify and distribute press releases about her arrival time at the incident site in Itaewon. So back then, regarding her arrival time at the site, there was a little controversy over that as well. And Park requested a review of the legality of custody as she was turned over to the prosecution in January, but this was dismissed, and she then filed for bail last month, citing that she's suffering from mental disorders and has the right to defend herself. And her attorney even explained that she had insomnia, nightmares, anxiety, and panic attacks. Now, Park returned to her office today, just a day after she was released, but the families of the tragedy's victims strongly protested Park's move and appeared at the district office requesting to meet her. And the families had gathered since early morning to stop Park from going to work. However, Park had left for her office earlier than them having gathered there, and she was able to avoid the crowd. And the protesters criticized Park's psychological impairments, saying that if she had these disorders, then they were just living corpse after having lost the lives of their loved ones, and requested that Park resigns from her district chief position, saying that someone so incompetent as her cannot take responsibility for the 230,000 residents of Yongsan's district.
It is quite shocking almost and surprising that she hasn't resigned from her position, but I mean, she could use the argument of mental disorders and saying that being in detention will give you insomnia, nightmares, anxiety, and panic attack. But honestly, even for myself, who has no mental issues, if I was in detention, I would not be able to sleep and have nightmares and anxieties and panic attacks on as to what's going to happen. So I don't think she's any different from anyone else. But again, they have the right to get bail. And as long as they don't, of course, flee overseas or anything like that, it's no problem there. Also today, the Ministry of Economy and Finance announced that starting early next month, people will be able to transfer up to $100,000 a year without any documents, doubling the current limit of $50,000. Of course, doesn't impact any one of us in this studio. But Haejang, give us the details of this.
Sure. Financial consumers in South Korea will be able to transfer up to $100,000 a year overseas without evidential documents starting next month. The revised plan expands the limit of foreign exchange that can be sent and received overseas without submitting separate documents or pre-reporting capital transactions from $50,000 to $100 per year. The ministry said that the adjustment came as the Korean economy has grown significantly since 1999, when the policy was first made, and as the size of the economy has expanded with the amount of foreign currency transactions soaring, the excessive regulation in the market caused inefficiency across the economy. It will also allow general currency exchange for customers, including regular citizens and businesses of large security firms, which is aimed to strengthen the competitiveness of financial companies in the foreign exchange field and offer more choices for customers. Firms will also be able to procure foreign currency more easily as well. To reduce the burden of overseas investment, the threshold for reporting large-scale foreign currency borrowings will be raised from $30 million to $50 million per year, and the frequent reporting of outbound direct investment will be abolished as well. The domestic currency exchange process for foreign investors will also be simplified. Foreign investors will now be able to exchange their foreign currency funds and invest in domestic securities without having to deposit them in Korea beforehand.
In the meantime, more numbers here. Starting next month, the tax cut on passenger car consumption, this will be terminated as part of the government's efforts to increase tax revenue. So, let's get more on this.
Right. So the Ministry of Strategy and Finance announced earlier today that the auto consumption tax, which was cut to 3.5% from 5% in July 2018, will not be extended further and expire at the end of this month. Hence, a basic tax rate of 5% will be applied again starting July. So the tax cut had been extended once during the COVID-19 pandemic to boost domestic demand. And this recent decision comes as the country has been seeing a continued decrease in tax revenue over the last few months amid the economic slowdown and sluggish business activities. The government referred to the current brisk car industry and improved consumption conditions as other reasons for its decision to terminate this car consumption tax. Now, according to government data, during the first 4 months of this year, the country's tax revenue amounted to 134 trillion won, which is down 33.9 trillion won from a year before. And the individual consumption tax reduction benefit is, in fact, capped at 1 million won. But if the limit was met, the taxes on education tax of 300,000 won and value-added tax of 130,000 won could be reduced by up to 1.4 million won around. This means that the tax burden will be higher than before. Now, in the case of domestic cars, the lower tax base is expected to reduce the tax burden by 300,000 to about 500,000 won. And unlike imported cars, which are subject to individual consumption tax at the import declaration stage, domestic cars were taxed relatively more because they were calculated based on the ex-factory price, which includes distribution costs and profits as well. Now, to eliminate this discrimination, the tax base for domestic cars shipped after July 1st will be adjusted downward by 18%. But so the tax burden of Hyundai's grandeur with a factory price of 42 million won will increase by 900,000 won due to the end of the tax rate cut, but then it will decrease by 540,000 won due to the lower tax base. But then in the end, the overall tax burden will increase by 360,000 won. And apart from the individual consumption tax rate, there are special systems such as the 100% reduction in individual consumption tax for eco-friendly cars, reduction in for that, as well as for the passenger cars for multi-child households are still in effect. So the actual tax burden varies by vehicle and by the owner as well. And in addition, the Ministry of Transport has decided to extend the individual consumption tax cut, which is 15% for power generation fuels, that's LNG, and others such as soft coal, which is scheduled to end at the end of this month by 6 months until the end of this year.
Everything is going up. We're all paying so much for everything nowadays. Cars are getting more expensive. I remember when domestic cars were so cheap, and it was stuff that I could even afford. But nowadays, I can't even afford a new domestic car anymore, and my mileage is increasing ever more in these cars. Let's talk about the economy. South Korea's economy is now predicted to grow 1.5% in 2023, and this is according to the OECD. This is not a big number here. Haejung, let's get the latest figures on this.
Right. The OECD has cut its growth outlook for South Korea this year, pointing to weak private investment and sluggish exports. South Korea's growth outlook for the year has been set lower than the overall global forecast, despite expectations that economic conditions will improve alongside a recovery in China. A report released by the OECD on Wednesday forecasted global growth for the year ahead at 2.7% and Korea's growth rate at 1.5%. This is more than 1 percentage point lower than the country's growth last year and lower than an earlier forecast in March. The organization attributed this pessimistic outlook to high interest rates and a sluggish housing market, posing burdens on private consumption and investment. It also recommended the support of vulnerable groups to enhance fiscal soundness in response to the country's aging population, such as providing training for the unemployed and improving women's participation in economic activities. As for the rest of the world, the OECD expects to see fragile growth this year amid slowing inflation from falling energy prices and a rebound in consumer and business sentiment. But the reopening of China's borders was evaluated as having a positive impact on the global economy, and with that, the country's predicted growth this year is set at 5.4%. However, the Eurozone was predicted to grow merely 0.9%, hindered by the ongoing war in Ukraine and high energy prices. And in addition, the World Bank raised its global growth forecast from 1.7% to 2.1%. The bank also cut its global growth prediction for 2024 to 2.4% from the 2.7% made in January, citing the ongoing effects of monetary policy, which has led to reduced business investment. It has also raised concerns over the possibility of a further economic slowdown caused by stress in the banking sector. And by region, the World Bank shared similar views with the OECD that China was predicted to show rapid growth this year, unlike the Eurozone.
It is concerning when, again, as Haejung said, if the OECD's global growth forecast is at 2.7% and South Korea's 1.5%, we are far below what the global average is, and really just shows at the current state of the economy that South Korea is facing at this time. Guys, we're going to talk about something that's very, very concerning right now that's happening over in Canada that's also affecting a large number of states in the United States as well. We have the massive wildfires that spread across Canada over the past few weeks, burning more than 3.8 million hectares of land, causing mass evacuations. It's leading to air quality alerts in the regions and the surrounding areas, this including where I am from in New York City. I have heard stories about this. I've seen pictures that my friends are showing. It is something out of a movie here. Chi, tell us more about this.
Right, so this wildfire centered in the eastern Canadian province of Quebec is continuously spreading, and local authorities are just struggling to contain it. Now, on Wednesday, this is local time, Canadian Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair said that 414 wildfires were still burning in the region. And despite the efforts of firefighting authorities, the number of wildfires has not decreased from more than 400 2 days ago. And in particular, more than 200 of these fires, half of them are so intense that authorities, they're just unable to extinguish them at this point. And with limited resources, it's only possible to fight 40 fires at the same time, which is why extinguishing efforts are being focused on the more urgent ones among the 150 more wildfires. And this has been going on since last month, and it has burned some 38,000 square kilometers of Canadian land as of today. And to put that to perspective, that's more than 1/3 the size of our country. The ongoing wildfires have cut off critical infrastructure in the region, with roads and high voltage power lines closed and communications lines disrupted as well. And over 20,000 people, including 6,500 indigenous people, have been evacuated. And like you mentioned, SJ, air quality is also at an all-time low, with the capital city of Ottawa's air quality index soaring to 486 this morning. And the figure above 300 is categorized as hazardous, and it has reached almost 500 as of this morning. Now, smoke from the wildfires has extended beyond Toronto to the U.S. cities of New York and even Washington, D.C. And to make things worse, there's no rain warning before next Monday afternoon, so it's likely that the current evacuation order will remain in place until at least early next week. And with the worst ever wildfires spreading, Canada is in dire need of foreign assistance, and Quebec hopes to receive 500 more firefighters from France, the United States, Portugal, and elsewhere in the coming days.
Yeah, again, I was talking to a buddy of mine in New York, and he was saying all the people had thrown away their masks now that there's like mask mandates lifted, and everyone's like in dire search of masks once again. And so it's pretty bad. They're saying all the windows, they're shutting. Not only are they shutting the windows, but they're sealing the windows. That's how bad it is. And I seen a picture that my buddy of mine had brought. It's like orange. The skies are orange. It's like brownish orange. It's something out of like a weird sci-fi movie, but it certainly is bad. Guys, let's talk about this dam collapse. We're talking about the Nova Kakhovka dam in southern Ukraine, which we have both Kyiv and Moscow blaming each other for. The dam collapse is threatening the lives of Ukrainians, and the international community has begun providing humanitarian assistance for Ukraine in response to this. So, Hejin, let's get the updates on that.
Right. Following the explosion of the dam in southern Ukraine on the 6th local time, relief efforts from international organizations and allies have continued as large-scale flooding has been occurring in nearby residential areas. The Ukrainian government called the destruction of the dam a catastrophe and appealed to the international community for swift assistance. In an address on Wednesday evening, Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky said it was impossible to predict how many people would die due to the flooding, urging a clear and rapid reaction from the world to support victims. According to the French presidential office, French President Emmanuel Macron and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres discussed the humanitarian situation in Ukraine and also added that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France Crisis Support Center will soon send about 10 tons of equipment for Ukrainian civilians for their first shipment. President Macron spoke by phone with President Zelensky and expressed solidarity over the destruction of the dam. Other European countries as well are also racing to aid Ukraine. The European Commission announced that it provided assistance to Ukraine with Germany, Austria, and Lithuania with humanitarian supplies such as water purifiers, generators, tents, and blankets. The International Organization for Migration also announced that it is going to provide emergency assistance and that they are working with Ukrainian authorities to expand assistance for water and sanitation in flooded areas and distribute emergency supplies. And UN humanitarian affairs officials as well also visited Kherson today to provide assistance.
You know, some of the things, I don't know if you guys had a chance to read this exclusive interview that was done by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky with Bild newspaper. This is the German-based newspaper. He was coming out saying that the Ukrainian rescuers, right, they're trying to rescue these people who are kind of, there's like, I don't want to sound too graphic here, but there's like bodies all over the area. There's people on the roofs of houses because it's completely flooded right now. They're saying that the Russian forces are shooting at Ukrainian rescuers.
Yeah.
And so they're unable to go ahead and rescue all the, the people who are stranded and things like that. And then now you have Turkish President Erdogan mediating again between Ukraine and Russia, and I believe he held phone calls with both Zelensky and Putin, and they, both of them go, it's their fault, it's their fault. And apparently there's going to be some kind of commission that's going to be set up with the two warring countries, Turkey and I believe some of the other, the UN, I think, is going to get involved with this. And the whole point of this is try to figure out who's responsible for this. But again, I mean, it's difficult right now when both sides refuse to accept the fact that it's their fault and so forth. But the biggest concern out of all this is not just the people who are the victims of the flooding, but also you have to take into consideration there's about like 10,000 hectares of agriculture for grain that's impacted by this. So the World Food Program is saying that this is going to further lead to the food crisis, which the Ukraine war has already led to a food crisis. So we'll continue to keep a close tab on this dam collapse issue here. Guys, thank you very much for coming in today with your reports. Have a safe one, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.